A viewer asked, how do you go about creating your dungeons? How much do you focus on your dungeons making sense for their intended purpose? Step 1. Submit your graph paper blueprints and building permits to the local dungeon building authority for planning review. I don't need my dungeon's realism factor to stand up under intense engineering scrutiny, but I always want them to make sense from a perspective of, this configuration of rooms could technically fulfill this purpose and has some kind of in-world logic that can be explained. Not even necessarily good logic, but logic that is consistent based on some set of assumptions. If I want some cool, weird dungeon that doesn't make sense, I will want to justify it with supernatural elements which circumvent the lack of logic. Like, you could quickly sketch a normal-ish structure that makes sense, but then it was infested by earth elementals who reshaped tunnels and rooms. In that case, your actual map might be a mind-melting mess, but it will still contain some of the corners and contours that hint at the normal shape it once had, so players should get that sense that it originated as a normal place. I don't think I have an algorithm for making dungeons. And at some point, they are fictional, so making a cool, fun, interesting environment wins out over practical concerns every time. That's what suspension of disbelief is for. But whether or not everything makes sense, unless the dungeon has just recently been warped or suffered cataclysmic destruction, you should use the ironclad rule that any authorized creature who would want to leave and re-enter the dungeon has a realistic way to do so. That means, if there's a ridiculous or dangerous puzzle, it either leads to a vault, insane prison cell, or other area which nobody enters or leaves, or it has to be relatively easy to bypass if you know the correct answer to the puzzle, or there's a way for the guards to disable and re-enable the trap/puzzle easily from the inside to let people in and out, which means they have to either have a way to communicate past the trap or a fixed schedule of when to open it. After satisfying the in and out principle, just try to make at least one or two of the following things true and either draw attention to them or let players uncover them, so it will create the impression that your dungeons are grounded in reality. Things like, a monster has a clear food source other than dumbass adventurers. After all, how often do people get through all the preceding dangers just to be eaten here? Monsters gotta live in between raids. Some humanoids have a designated sleeping area and or kitchen and or latrine. You almost always see this in low or medium level WotC dungeons, ye old goblin sleeping area. Some creatures other than the main faction that is defending the place still have a clear reason to be there. For example, the cultists pay the gnolls to guard the river entrance, but also allow them to use the mystical fountain of healing. Money alone is a pretty boring reason, unless being super rich and using that wealth is a signature feature of the main faction, which is different than a hoarder like a dragon. Most dragons didn't get rich by providing fair wages and benefits. If these creatures are fighting against the main faction, their presence must either be a very recent or time-sensitive thing, or there has to be some explanation of how they have remained in the dungeon for a longer period without either winning, dying, or being forced out. If there is crazy machinery, show some power source and or some hint as to how that machinery was constructed or installed. For example, have a workshop with some molds used to forge the giant gear wheels, which run that insane trap that crushed the bard earlier. Especially if those gears were too big to fit through the tunnels to get here. Or let them find the water wheel in the great underground waterfall which powers the room where the walls closed in, on the bard. If the answer is just, it's magic, that's okay, but put in some kind of description to make it feel more mechanistic. Some sign of how the magic interacts with the trap mechanism, or indications of how it was created, or a particular gem, rune, statue, or other symbol that actually contains the magic. Note, usually you place this stuff beyond the trap, possibly lightly hidden for them to find, but an unknown mechanism beforehand might give the party a chance to do something clever and avoid it. Or to do something they think is clever, but which actually sets the trap in motion. Overall, it might be cool to work out your dungeon's whole ecology, all the watch schedules, etc., but unless you have a very specific reason, it's just not worth the time. I think if you follow the principles above, though, or add your own touches along the same lines, you can create more than enough of the feel of realism for suspension of disbelief to carry things the rest of the way. Though it would be cool to have a dungeon where the party had to work out the ecology or food chain in order to solve a mystery, or to find a way to drive off a monster too powerful to fight. Anyway, if you have a question for #RPGqa or a suggestion for one of my RPG makeup videos, please leave a comment below or tweet it to #RPGqa, or you can ask it on the Patreon post for this video. My channel is completely supported by patrons, including the far too generous members of the organization. If you'd like to join them in supporting me and Tales from my D&D campaign, you don't have to give that much. Even $1 or $2 a month makes a big difference at patreon.com/Demonac. Thanks so much for making YouTube my full-time job.